So everyone, welcome back to Edie's SustyTalk video series, our long-running video series that was originally set up in lockdown to keep sustainability professionals connected and talking about the sustainability movement as this first wave of what's now been dubbed a power crisis has emerged. We are live from our flagship ED23 event in London, 1st and 2nd of March, and you'll be seeing a lot of these videos up on our website and YouTube channel over the coming days. As mentioned, this is our premier annual event dedicated to achieving environmental and social transformations, and is all focused on courageous business leadership. And of course, the old adage goes is that you can't manage what you can't measure. And as companies do look to transform for the better, there is a need, and a much better need, for approaches to both data and disclosure in terms of how businesses can drive transformational change and actually start delivering on some pretty lofty ambitions that a lot of companies have set. So it's very fortunate then that I'm joined by Lauren Moir, and who is the Senior Global Reporting Lead for Dentsu International, and of course Kentaro Kawamori, who is the CEO of Persefoni, who are sponsoring all our SustyTalk discussions for these ones. So firstly, thank you both for joining us at E23. I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of catch the vibe, I suppose it is, but how have you found it so far, Kentaro?
Fantastic. Among courageous business leaders, I think I'm the least courageous here. I'm happy to be among a really energetic and passionate crowd of sustainability folks. So thanks for having us.
Okay, and Lauren, I know you just got back from a Tokyo flight, so the jet lag hasn't quite set in just yet.
No, I'm fortunate this session is happening in the morning, because if it was happening in the afternoon, we might be in a bit of trouble.
Great stuff. Well,
Yeah.
Can I actually start with you in that case then, Lauren? And I suppose a good place to start would just be getting a bit of background on Dentsu's approach to reporting and disclosure. Obviously, lead on that. What are the kind of key milestones that you've been able to achieve with your team, who I know are watching in the background so far?
Thanks, Matt. So I guess for a long time now, Dentsu's been a proponent of quality ESG disclosure. We've been publishing an integrated report since 2016, so putting our non-financial information next to our financial information. We have been disclosing against CDP since 2010, so we continue to strive for leadership there. In 2021, we set our net zero target and had it endorsed by the Science Based Targets Initiative, so that was a really big milestone for us, and we were one of the first companies globally to achieve this. And also in 2022, we implemented Salesforce Net Zero Cloud so that we can better optimize and automate our data collection and reporting. So lots going on.
Okay, stuff. And Kentaro, I suppose we'll start a bit about yourself and Persefoni. We've had some discussions already off camera about the name, so if we could perhaps outline what exactly that means, and also why carbon management and climate disclosure are becoming so important for corporates as well.
Sure. Well, Persefoni means the best carbon management and how to market. The name, as we talked about, was inspired by the Greek goddess of springtime and regrowth. So when we branded the company, we wanted to do something a little bit different than the typical sort of green leaf, sun kind of imagery. But what we really set out to do is build the best system of record, build the best software tool sets to set the baseline, account for your carbon, but ultimately manage the decarbonization on an ongoing basis. And that includes all the way through, of course, setting the science-based target, but then ultimately beating that. And that's a multi-decade journey that's going to require, very sophisticated tools and data sets in the interim. And that's what we're building.
Brilliant stuff. And Lauren, as a global company, Dentsu has been kind of probably pressed by multiple different bits of policy. I mean, in the UK, for example, we're seeing TCFD mandates and transition pathway plans all coming in. How do you kind of advise sustainability professionals that perhaps aren't quite in the position that Dentsu are and having that kind of history of milestones behind them to start to prepare for what are definitely more stringent, both kind of voluntary and regulatory requirements on data and disclosure? What kind of proactive steps can they be taking?
Yeah, I think as we know, the regulatory landscape is really rapidly evolving. So I think hopefully it will mean that it will become easier for sustainability professionals to report against a harmonized set of standards and regulations. So I think I remember sort of 5-10 years ago, it was a lot harder to convince maybe the executives or the people with the stakeholders within your company to report. But now regulation is making it a whole lot easier. So I think if you're a company that's starting out, it's arguably a good time to be starting, because the mandate is there. I think the hope is, as I said, the hope for us is that harmonization does occur, especially for a multinational company like Dentsu, who's listed in both Japan and the UK, we need to make sure that our reporting is obviously aligned to both sets of regulation. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a challenging area, and I don't think there's sort of one piece of advice I could give other than just, I think you can often in sustainability reporting get a little bit bogged down internally, but if you can just remind yourself to stay on top of what's happening externally, I think that's a good reminder.
No, and that harmonisation point's key. It's not quite there. And Kentaro, I'd love to bring you in on that point. I mean, for the companies that you're kind of working with and the businesses that you are, how are they getting to grips with this lack of harmonisation and, you don't want to be kind of duplicating data sets. What kind of common challenges are they running into that you're having to advise with?
We work with a lot of publicly traded, companies like Dentsu with huge international exposure. Some have industrial exposure, some don't. Various supply chain complexities and those sort of things. I would say 24 months ago, the conversation was overwhelming about the alphabet soup of ESG climate. I definitely see that condensing quite a bit these days, so it's trending the right way. And this one of the key initiatives that we're certainly very supportive of is the ISSB. Of course, yet another acronym, but the ISSB is working very closely with the G7 and financial regulators around the world to create parity across those reporting schemes. So we've been very supportive of regulatory schemes around the world, and we work very closely with many of those. I think there's of course multiple layers. What's unequivocal is that the greenhouse gas protocol continues to be the gold standard for accounting. How that manifests into ultimately a report, of course, is going to differ slightly. So in the U.S., big debate is, are you going to go scope 1, 2, and 3 through the SEC's proposed climate rulings? Is it going to be scope 1 and 2 only? What I always advise sustainability practitioners is to work backwards from what they actually are trying to accomplish, right? For many sustainability practitioners, that is not just a report, but to decarbonize the business over time. And that sometimes gets lost in the quest for adherence to these various standards and these various reporting schemes. So that would be my sort of singular piece that I always encourage everyone to start with is I try to advise sustainability leaders not to advise the business to convince them to report. We should convince them to decarbonize, and sort of the reporting is the necessary step in between. I actually always tell people, stay away from the acronyms. Let the sustainability professionals handle that. All the business really needs to know is how do we do this better, more sustainably.
No, that's some great points there. And a question I want to put to both of you is, because we get this so many times, data we cover a lot. We do webinars, we do reports on, we do sessions like this right now. And one of the common questions we always get is like, how do I start? I don't have good data, I have poor quality data, and the people are asking for it. So how to catch the balance? So my question, I'll come to you, Lauren, first, is if you were going to offer a key bit advice, just starting out, when you have a pretty kind of vague data set already and you want to improve that, what are the steps? What's the next step there?
Sure. I think the first step is really materiality, and that's the key, because if you can demonstrate to your stakeholders what your material issues are, then you can justify prioritising certain metrics, because that's where you'll have the most potential for impact.
Great. And Kentaro, to you?
Just get started is what I would tell people. That the materiality, I think, is absolutely the gold standard of where should head. There's no utility in gathering data and measuring stuff that isn't going to be useful for your business in the end. It's not material to your business. But I would say the most common sin that I see committed is just analysis paralysis. And one of the frequent conversations these days is actually, we're looking out at the conference exhibition space here. There's dozens of vendors here. It's actually going to get worse for a little bit of time. There's going to be so many vendors, so many new solutions, so much capital coming in the space. New use cases are popping up. So the advice I give up to everybody is just get started, just pick an area. There's no such thing as a perfect solution. There's no such thing as perfect data. In fact, it's going to be bad, and there's going to be things that you did wrong along the way. You just have to sort of know that going into it, but much easier to say and do that in practice, because nobody likes to do things imperfectly or likes to do them wrong.
There's always been this danger for sustainability professionals that the data gathered kind of gets put in a report, and the report's published and it's nice and glossy, and then just sits there kind of in a PDF file that doesn't necessarily change. But what we're seeing right now, and as a journalist, I'm always fascinated about greenwash. I'd say I'm fascinated. I'm also really challenged by it. We get lots of pictures for stuff, and I have to determine whether or not this is greenwash. But to me, it seems the more transparent, the more data a company can disclose, and the more data they have, the kind of less at risk they are from inadvertently greenwashing as well. And I'd like to get your thoughts on how, I mean, Lauren at Dentsu, how data has really helped you be kind of clear with whatever stakeholder you're engaged with to avoid greenwash, which can be innocuous, it's not always deliberate or malicious.
Yeah, I like to think that sustainability reporting has come a long way since it used to be more of a vehicle to tell good news stories than actually help your stakeholders understand how you're managing the performance against ESG risks and opportunities. So I think when it comes to ensuring credibility, I think assurance is key. And we're seeing a trend towards reasonable assurance from limited assurance, which is really interesting, I think. And it obviously builds further trust among our stakeholders, which is super important, especially as a business that sells to consumers.
Okay, and Kentaro, that question, I mean, how, the subject of the business you must engage with, greenwash must be a real fear of theirs at the moment.
It's actually less common than you might think. I think it used to be a much bigger topic. To your point, I think most greenwashing risk these days is inadvertent. It's the data quality is poor. Somebody said something in some department that wasn't quite aligned with the actual reality of it. So I always say one of the greatest dangers in business is the fact that perception tends to be reality, depending on how you're looking at it. So I don't see a lot of intentional greenwashing in the markets, and I have very few of those conversations where people are concerned with that. Lauren's point on assurance is absolutely spot on. At the end of the day, that will solve that almost unequivocally. Because right now, if you calculate your carbon footprint and you report it, for the vast majority of companies, it's sort of like having your fifth grader grading their own homework. It's not a good system. It doesn't work. And it's not generally because they're trying to get it wrong. It's because they just don't know what they don't know. And it's for the same reasons you wouldn't report your financials, into the public markets and not have somebody check that that's done correctly with an objective lens to it. The realities of our world is the variability of how these calculations are done. What data is used is much, much wider than the financial world. And so the assurance and the audit piece is going to be an absolute critical piece to engendering trust in the markets, getting rid of this concept of greenwashing. And I would say that the concept of greenwashing today will manifest itself much differently in the future than it does today.
Okay, well, you both kind of give me a really kind of succinct journey of how this has evolved as a topic and how it becomes really crucial to basically everything they're trying to do. I really love the point that, the data is just a means to decarbonisation, essentially. I think that's crucial. So thank you so much for providing some great insight on data disclosure. I realise we could be sat here for the rest of the 2 days talking about this topic, but I also appreciate there is a venue, an event going on right now, and you probably want to be able to kind of take part in some of the discussions. So Lauren, Kentaro, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Matt.
No problem. And we, of course, will be back throughout the course of the next 2 days with more SustyTalks, with more thought leaders and more conversations on all things sustainability. So see you then.